to welcome all of you to HempTruth. It's our inaugural webinar, and we're thrilled you can be with us. This is a really exciting time to be in hemp, and HempTruth was launched to build a transparent and trusted hemp marketplace and share straightforward, impartial information from experts that will help farmers and genetics buyers unmask fraudulent or misleading information. We really appreciate you dialing in. This webinar and the HempTruth initiative overall are part of a public service campaign by High Grade Hemp Seed. Throughout the panel, you can join the conversation by using the hashtag HempTruth. A key challenge that buyers are facing this year with hemp genetics is separating fact from fiction around performance claims. So today we have a great slate of expert panelists who are going to discuss compliance, licensing, certification, some common false claims that we're seeing in the marketplace, and provide some concrete steps that all of you can take to ensure your genetics suppliers are reputable and can deliver a product that will perform as promised in the field. Before we dive in, I'd like to welcome our panelist. Rachel, let's start with you. Rachel Hankins is joining us from Oregon State University. She's an instructor, a seed certification specialist, and hemp program coordinator with the Oregon Seed Certification Service. She works with new and novel hemp varieties being entered into the program and was pivotal in developing OSU's certified hemp program. Rachel works with national and regional seed certification bodies. She's an ISTA certified sampler, and she provides training to all of the OSU seed samplers. As you can tell from that introduction, she knows quite a little bit about hemp seed. So thanks for joining us, Rachel. Courtney, you're up next. Courtney Barnes is an associate attorney at Wivicente Sederberg LLP, where she focuses on hemp law, policy, and regulatory compliance. In a constantly evolving legal landscape, clients look to Courtney to help them navigate the complex regulations governing their production, manufacture, and distribution of hemp and hemp products in the US. Courtney has extensive experience drafting and helping to implement state and local cannabis regulatory regimes relating to various aspects of the industry. Welcome, Courtney. And JP Kaloy is also with us. He's the compliance manager at High Grade Hemp Seed, one of the largest feminized hemp genetics producers in the world. Prior to joining High Grade, JP held positions in several prominent medical marijuana and CBD extraction companies and spent nearly a decade in various roles at Bayer Crop Sciences, breeding and supply chain organizations that included managing pre-foundation and foundation seed production. In his current role, he's responsible for High Grade's reporting and licensing with the Colorado Department of Agriculture, seed certification, as well as other licensing and compliance requirements for export into other states. We're glad you're here, JP.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. My name's Trish Thomas. I'm going to be facilitating today. And we are going to take your questions in the middle of the panel and at the end of the panel. If all of you will note down at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button. And if you click that, you can submit questions at any time. We're going to take as many questions as we can during the course of the panel. So feel free to go ahead and enter your questions to us anytime that you're ready to. And when we take a break for Q&A, I'll try to weave as many into the conversation as possible. I'd like to start, guys, with discussing the hemp genetics marketplace right now. Humans have been cultivating hemp for thousands of years, as we all know, but the recent reintroduction of hemp in the US has left farmers with a lot of knowledge gaps. It's a new crop to us. What's old is new again. Courtney, I know that you're kind of an encyclopedia of hemp, so I'd love it if you could tell us briefly about the history of legalization and regulation for hemp.
Sure. So as you said, hemp has been cultivated worldwide for thousands of years and is used in a variety of, thousands of different uses, whether it's textiles, construction materials, personal care products, food, etc. It wasn't until, though, the passage, hemp was cultivated in the United States up until really the 1930s, when the passage of the Marijuana Tax Act made cultivation a lot more onerous and expensive. And over the next several years, as a result of misplaced anti-drug sentiment confusing hemp with marijuana and a variety of other kind of political and cultural factors, it became more and more difficult to grow hemp in the United States from a regulatory standpoint. And in up until the 1970s with the passage of the Controlled Substances Act, it defined cannabis or marijuana, excuse me, as encompassing all parts of the plant except for sterilized seeds and stalks, which effectively outlawed the domestic cultivation of hemp in the United States. So then in 2014, we start to see this kind of re-experimentation with domestic cultivation with the passage of the 2014 Farm Bill. And the 2014 Farm Bill created this limited pilot program for state departments of agriculture and institutions of higher education to cultivate hemp for research purposes. We're still in that sort of time, but in 2018, the 2018 Farm Bill was passed, and that effectively removed hemp from the definition of marijuana under the CSA, classified hemp as an agricultural commodity, and swapped regulatory oversight from the DEA to the USDA. And now we're in the process of implementing this kind of new commercial program with the 2014 Farm Bill pilot program sunsetting in the next year. And states now are starting to implement commercial hemp programs that allow license holders to cultivate, harvest, and sell hemp for commercial purposes, subject to both federal and state requirements. So we're kind of seeing this new industry reemerge that was outlawed for about half a century.
Yeah, very interesting history we have with a very interesting plant for sure. JP, I'd love to hear from you on the various uses for the hemp plant and the type of hemp genetics that farmers are working with today.
Sure. So Courtney kind of went over some of the traditional uses as far as fiber production for textile. More recently, we're seeing production for smokable flower and even more so for extraction, whether that's for isolate or for distillate. There's, the CBD has been one of the larger known cannabinoids that have been extracted from the plant. CBG is another one that is new to not new, but is getting more attention these days. There's the great thing about hemp is there's also the potential of having a tri-crop where you could produce, both cannabinoids, seeds, and fiber. And that's, new to a lot of conversations with genetic production. Beyond what it's meant for, there's, the great thing about cannabis is there's a lot of people find a lot of other uses for the byproducts, whether it's hempcrete or other byproducts, whether it be mulch and whatnot. And so I think there's a lot of potential for the plant beyond what we're using it for today, but certainly there's a lot of uses being used today for the plant.
Absolutely. Can you talk about, for people that aren't super familiar with the hemp plant and kind of what it's used for, the different types of hemp genetics that are on the market and what's significant about feminized hemp seeds that are, optimized for cannabinoid production?
Sure. And so with that, there's a few different, genetics available. There's industrial hemp genetics that were developed mostly for that textile production and wasn't really developed for cannabinoid production. I think Courtney touched upon a really important point of, when hemp was separated from marijuana. And the definition is that it's below 0.3%. And I think that is one of the main characteristics that any farmer wanting to grow hemp is interested in, is maintaining that compliant trait. And so beyond that, I think it's what the intended end use is for the farmer. A lot these days is pretty popular for extraction of oil.
Very good. For all the panelists, as we see in any boom time, there's usually a lot of fraud and misinformation and confusion that hits the marketplace. We're seeing that definitely in the hemp genetics market this season. What are some of the top complaints or points of confusion that you're hearing from farmers from your various perspectives? Who wants to go first? Shout it out.
I guess I'll jump in on this first. I think, one of the, if I were to rate it, I'd say it depends on the company you're dealing with. And I think that has to do with the amount of research, farmers need to do to kind of verify their source. It's also going to depend on a lot of, the state requirements. Some of the states are requiring, some of the farmers to do a little bit more digging. And so, I think through that digging, things become less murky. But, I'd ask, Rachel and Courtney to kind of also comment on it.
What are you seeing, Courtney, from a legal perspective where maybe you're hearing that there's confusion on the streets or gaps in people's knowledge?
Sure. So I think a lot of it, just because this is a new industry and the 0.3% threshold is such a finite number. So a lot of states that don't have years of experience cultivating hemp or that are just now coming online, it's really hard to tell whether the performance of seeds in one area will be the same in a, halfway across the country. So I think kind of the predictability of THC content and cannabinoid content generally is something people are struggling with. And then also kind of your traditional seed sort of issues with like germination rates and, and receiving the product as labeled.
Sure, sure. Rachel, what are you seeing on the seed certification front, or what are you hearing are the points of confusion there?
I see a lot of confusion about what certified seed is. A lot of these companies are saying that they have certified seed, but what they're really meaning is that they have seed that's been tested. It's been tested for germinations or for feminization rates, but it hasn't actually gone through a seed certification process. And I think once people get familiar with what we call blue tag seed, I think that they'll start looking for that as a assurance of the genetics that they're getting.
Very good. That's really helpful. Piggybacking onto that, Rachel, can you share how the national and state level seed certification programs are responding to the legalization of hemp? What are they doing to help provide proven, verified genetics?
So all the seed certification agencies in the U.S. operate under our umbrella, which is the Association of Official Seed Certifying Agencies, or AOSCA as we call it. And they've really started several years ago. We started revamping our standards that we have, because we have field standards, we have inspection standards, purity and germination, and feminization rate standards. And those all actually have been around for years out of Canada, which is a member of our agency. And they had the food, fiber, and grain varieties. So everything that we had was sort of outdated for the CBD, CBG varieties that you're starting to see. So we had to start amending those and changing those a few years ago. Just last week, I believe they are doing their first variety review board for the varieties that are coming in. So within hopefully the next month or so, we'll actually see certified varieties out there. Right now, each state is sort of doing it on their own. Colorado has a very robust variety review program that they've had with field trials and all this other stuff, but that's a huge undertaking for any single state to take. So I'm really glad that the national level is stepping up for that. In Oregon, we've been doing inspections under what we call our experimental line program. So we're doing all of the seed source verification, we're doing the field inspections, we're doing all the seed tests, just like you would for certified seed, but we're sort of putting them in a holding pattern until the National Review Board comes out with a recommendation on those varieties. If and when those varieties are accepted, then we will happily put the certified tags on it. It's just sort of a way to have for people to get that seed ready and waiting for that blue tag.
That makes a lot of sense. I know that some clarity on a national level will be really helpful for everyone in the business right now. Courtney, I'd love to hear from you. What does the legal landscape look like when it comes to buying hemp seed? What are suppliers' obligations to share data or back up any claims that they're making?
Sure. So as Rachel touched on, hemp seeds are regulated under a few bodies of law, both at the federal and state level. You have, the 2018 Farm Bill, which allows for the cultivation of viable seed to produce hemp. Then you have your 2014 Farm Bill pilot programs, which is same thing, kind of the cultivation authorization. And then the state hemp programs, which are provide a little bit more detail and regulatory standards. For example, you have to be a licensed cultivator, but a lot of state hemp programs also require, if you're going to sell viable seed, to have an agricultural hemp seed producer license as part of the hemp program. And then on top of that, you also have your Federal Seed Act, and then the state equivalents of the state Seeds Acts, which regulate labeling and truthfulness in advertising, and but are applicable to more than just hemp. So it's agricultural and vegetable seeds as well. And with respect to the second part of your question with sharing data and backing up claims, so it really depends on each hemp program, but there are these kind of overarching, under the Federal Seed Act and really just like federal advertising laws about truthfulness and advertising. The Federal Seed Act gets a bit more specific in labeling requirements, and you have to, keep records that demonstrate all of the information on your label and your advertising is truthful, as well as record keeping that's pretty substantial pursuant to each state hemp program as well, with respect to just cultivation quantity and things along that nature. But really it's going to be the substantiation of whatever information and whatever claims you're making about the label that
Okay.
are required to keep data to substantiate.
That makes sense. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'd like to ask all of you, with 1 being crummy and 10 being fantastic, how would each of you rate the level of trust and transparency in the hemp genetics market this year? Any kind of bellwether rating on how we're doing as an industry? What do you think?
Well, most of the companies that I work with are really trying to be transparent. So I have a very skewed vision of it because I'm not purchasing. I mean, we're an independent third party. So the people that are contacting me are being very trustworthy and transparent and upfront. But again, I'm super skewed the wrong direction, I think.
Yeah, if they're talking to you, they're doing something right. So that's really good. Courtney and JP, do you have any kind of range or gut check on kind of how you're feeling about the level of trustworthiness in the marketplace?
I'll kind of jump on to what Rachel said. I can't really comment on other companies. I don't know their efforts, but HGH is most certainly trying to go through the process and do it the right way and be very transparent with all the regulators and get all of our documents in place and be able to provide that to our customers when requested. And so that's kind of my comment there. And so again, I'm a little skewed on the way that I view it.
Right, right.
Sure. So as a lawyer, our job is to help people have all the tools and the right documentation and be in compliance with federal and state law. So I guess I could say the same thing in that the people we work with, really do try to be responsible, diligent, compliant operators and have contracts to enforce that. But we are seeing increased litigation in the space with respect to buyers, saying that these seeds have much higher germination rates than they actually do, or same with feminization. And there is a definite kind of increase in litigation with respect to misrepresentation in seed and genetics purchasing. Luckily not too close to home, I suppose.
Right. That's good. That's good to hear. Well, now that we've shared an overview of the marketplace, we've kind of talked about the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'd like to dig into the legal and contractual nuts and bolts of actually buying hemp seeds and starts and see what we can do to shed a little bit of light on the buying experience and what people can look for. Courtney, kind of continuing with you, can you explain the licenses required to sell hemp genetics and how buyers can verify that their supplier or sales representative is licensed?
Sure. So as I touched on previously, many states do require you to either be all states, virtually all states of the hemp program require you to either be a licensed cultivator or additionally either a licensed hemp seed producer, agricultural hemp seed distributor. And usually there's records that you can search to determine whether an operator is at least licensed and in good standing. Some states vary with respect to the amount of information on each kind of pilot program registrant or hemp program licensee, but generally you can access that information through the State Department of Agriculture, both with the hemp programs and then also kind of certified seed dealers. A lot of that is available online. And you also, if you're kind of negotiating with potential sellers, you would want to request that license from them as well.
Great, as part of your due diligence. That makes a lot of sense. Rachel, I know that seed certification has been around for decades, but the idea of certification for hemp, particularly feminized hemp seeds, is pretty new and vague. You've kind of given us an overview of hemp seed certification programs nationwide, and I know that AOSCA coming out with some some national guidelines will be helpful. But do you have any tips for how people can verify the seed certification, maybe of suppliers that they're looking at or strains that they're considering purchasing?
Yeah, so basically, if you don't see a certified tag on there with the AOSCA logo, it's not certified. That's sort of the key point. And you can always reach out to the state. On the AOSCA website, they have contact information for each of the state certifying agencies. And really looking at that is going to give you your contact information to contact that person. And I know that I've reached out to several different managers to say, hey, this person on the web says that they have certified seed. I don't see a tag. I don't see an analysis tag. I don't see anything that's going to, a field inspection report, anything that's going to help back up that claim. So looking for those things. And the other thing I forgot to mention about AOSCA is the other way we're serving the industry is we're not just looking at field production of seed. We have greenhouse standards, we have clone standards that are coming out. We're trying to figure out how can we certify transplants so that you could buy a certified seedling of hemp. So we're really trying to help the industry, and because it is different than anything that's out there. You don't have this super complex different cultivation schemes in any other conventional crop that we do.
Right. Now, I know it's posed some challenges. I would like to, before we move on, address Oregon specifically, because I know that Oregon is really setting the gold standard right now in seed certification, and you're definitely have one of the more mature hemp agricultural communities nationwide. Can you tell us a few things that you guys are doing in Oregon that's maybe a little bit unique, or that's particularly helpful in validating performance and sourcing?
Sure. So we are, again, relying on the National Variety Review Board or a plant variety protection or a patent in order to accept the varieties into our program. So we're really making sure that those genetics are what they say they are. All of our standards have to meet the AOSCA minimums. That's the rules. But our standards are actually set by a group of hemp producers, breeders, and growers in Oregon, and they can choose to set our standards higher than those AOSCA minimums, which they have chosen to do. So the minimum for feminization rate at the national level is 99%. Oregon's is 99.9 currently. We also, instead of having a 3-mile isolation, you have to have 4 miles of isolation from any other cannabis plants. And really, we're doing a lot of greenhouse production. So a lot of those have HEPA filters, they're sealed greenhouses. They have all of these fancy schmancy things to exclude any sort of outside pollen to come in. And I think all of those things are really setting Oregon apart from other producing areas. And that's really what our growers want. They really want to be the gold standard.
That's great to hear. No, I knew that you guys were doing a fantastic job. And kudos to you and OSU for leading the way. Courtney, the reality is that some companies are touting, false certifications. There's documentation out there that's inaccurate. What can farmers do to protect themselves contractually at the time of purchase? What should be included in any sound contract for hemp seed or starts?
Sure. So having a contract to begin with is a great step one. You definitely want the agreement in writing. You want the agreement to specify that it overrides any verbal agreements or affirmations, that it is kind of, the one form that provides all of the terms and conditions for purchase. And you really want both attestations of compliance by the buyer and the seller, that they're licensed, that they are permitted to engage in the conduct, they're lawfully able to make the sale, that they're not infringing any property rights. And those are kind of your standard terms. You also would, want to ensure your choice of law is in a good state with like the hemp program and hemp laws that, may be relevant to the particular claims that would be a term of the contract. And then you really want strong representations and warranties as to fit for purpose or particular use, and really just like any of the label claims that you would be buying it for, especially like in some states where the certification at the hemp, for the hemp programs are based on, THC content. So just anything that may come up from a quality and compliance standpoint, you want that articulated in writing as well. And then also kind of I think is very important with respect to seeds is a reasonable time for inspection and rejection. So whether this is, you can break it into two parts and have a visual inspection component that must be conducted within 48 hours and then of receipt, and then you have an opportunity to reject based on visual inspection. And then there's also, if negotiable, a inspection window for germination, which sometimes, is anywhere from 30 days or so. And that's if you pass visual inspection, then you get a germination inspection window. And we'll see sometimes, sellers provide a standard operating procedure for germination to make sure they're following exactly how they should be planted. And then also window for either a refund or receiving more seeds if the germination rate doesn't deliver in practice. And I think that's like a really good way to kind of have the seeds and test them with defined terms for either refunding or renegotiating if they don't turn out to be as expected.
That was a great debrief on kind of the clauses to look for and the things to make sure that they're covered. And as much as we all know, environment, farming practices, to your point, geography, field conditions can have a huge impact on the end crop. You want to make sure that the genetics you start with are sound. So that's super helpful. We're going to be taking questions in just a couple of minutes. I've got one more question for the panelists. So if any of you have something percolating, go ahead and click that Q&A button at the bottom and add it, and we'll weave it in during this next QA session. I wanted to address for all of you certificates of authority, COAs. They're crucial in this business. We're seeing a lot of fake or altered COAs hitting the market. What do you recommend buyers do to ensure that the COAs that they rely on are legit? Any tips or due diligence practices that people can use?
I would say one of the main things that I could recommend is ensuring that those results, those COAs, are coming from a third party accredited ISO laboratory. One that would, if the state regulators were to ask for that documentation, that they would accept it as well. And you could do an online search just to verify those labs exist, and just to follow up, you could call those labs and just ask some questions there as well.
Great. Any other tips, Rachel or Courtney, that can help people spot faulty COAs?
I think the independent laboratory is a huge one. Also, if there's a way to match the COA with the batch in the particular, to make sure that that COA actually corresponds to the seeds that you're buying. And really just ensuring that each line item of information corresponds to both the seeds as well as the inspection or certificate of analysis data points.
Great. Anything you wanted to add on that, Rachel, or did we cover all the major stuff?
I think you guys covered it all.
Great. JP, another problem that we've been seeing in the competitive genetics landscape is producers and brokers sharing unrealistic ratios for THC to CBD, CBG, other cannabinoids. Is there anything you can share with people about that situation? I know that those ratios can vary widely, but just any general guardrails?
We take it off mute. I would say, again, just to emphasize that third-party ISO-accredited lab, that's where the results originated from, not some fabricated document that, you can make up on a Word document. So I think that's, just to reiterate what Courtney and I said earlier, is just making sure that came from an ISO-accredited laboratory. Great.
And I know that with a lot of these labs, people can typically, or sometimes at least if it's a larger lab, go on their website, correct, to get more information, to view a sample document, to look up results. Is that correct?
Say that one more time. Sorry.
I said typically people can, at least with some of the larger third-party labs, go online to verify either certain elements of the report they're looking at or things like that, correct?
Sure. They could take that report and email it to the lab and say, is this a report that came out of your lab? Once that's provided by the seed vendor.
Great. Good idea. Just to double check. Courtney, before we go to QA, I'd love to hear, like, what happens if somebody does get fleeced? Is there any legal recourse if you buy fraudulent genetics? Is it kind of a buyer beware situation out there and people just need to try to protect themselves practically? What's the climate?
So it should never be a buyer beware situation. That's the importance of contracts, and it really depends on the terms of the contracts, the remedy available. There are certain opportunities for recourse through the Federal Seed Act and state seed acts, as well as kind of just, like truth in labeling. But for the most part, it's really protecting yourself with contracts, having indemnification provisions, either arbitration or, potential, all the procedures outlined in the event of breach and clear terms of what breaching a contract would. So as I kind of hit on before with your standard terms and ensuring that everything's in writing and that there's no opportunity for, a bill of lading or a verbal affirmation to kind of confuse what the guiding document is really, really important. And there is opportunities for recourse so long as you have, strong contracts.
That's great. Very helpful. We do have some questions coming in, so let's shift for a few minutes and respond to some of the things that are on our attendees' minds. Rachel, this one's specifically for you. How many companies or varieties have currently been approved through the OSU program or are in the program? And can people find that information anywhere? How do they access the list of companies that are in the Seed Cert program?
So we do have a list of certified hemp seed producers on our website. Currently, there is only one company who's gone from start to finish. And you can find that if you just Google Oregon Seed Cert, it'll pop right up. There's big flashing letters everywhere that says hemp, and just keep clicking on that, and eventually you'll get to the list. We will add more people as they come on. I think we have one more company who's in the testing stage right now. But just again, as a legal disclaimer, so Courtney doesn't get mad at me, is that these are technically not certified yet because we're still under that experimental program. Some states are accepting them as meeting their certification requirements, and some states are. So definitely check where you're at.
Where you're at. Okay, very helpful. And good, as more and more companies take their strains through the program, we'll be seeing the list on that website flesh out, I'm sure. Let's see. What is the time and cost commitment to get a seed certified?
So it's not that much extra time for the producer, as long as they fill out the appropriate paperwork, and it's more of just a logistics, because we do have to do 3 inspections. So we have to make sure we're out there before pollination, but when the female flowers are visible, we have to be out there when the pollen donors are actively pollinating, and we have to do a 3rd inspection to look for off types or any hermaphroditic branches, anything like that. And then you just have to make sure that you follow the steps, because once you miss a step, then you can't really go backwards. So to me, the process is pretty straightforward because it's very logical, but learning the process might take a little bit of extra time, and the paperwork involved, I think, is where most people get hung up with it. But once you have the process down, I think it's fairly painless, because it's just remembering to schedule your inspections.
Right. So it's more about organization than it being very expensive or adding a huge amount of time to the overall process.
Right. And each state sets their own costs for inspections. So you'll have to check with your local seed certifying agency to see what the costs are there.
Perfect. Another question, and this is interesting looking to the future, will there be a new standard of grading seed or biomass in the future as a better way to compare what you're buying or selling? So I know in a lot of commodities markets, we see a grading system that helps people understand quality control and where the product they're looking at kind of rates on the scale of good to bad. Do you guys see that happening in the hemp industry?
I believe that it'll move more towards certification. Is one way that you can say that, I guess, would be my best guess. Just because it actually will give more confidence to the farmers and to the buyers that the genetics that they're actually buying is that it's gone through the processes that Rachel's explained.
Anybody else have any crystal ball prediction on a grading standard? It's fine if you don't. I have a feeling that there is going to be a lot more guidance as we get a few more seasons under our belt. Thanks for your input on that. Is it legal to send and buy genetics in the mail?
Sure. So as a lawyer, it depends. There are a variety of regulations that would apply. For example, in many states, you aren't allowed to possess or use viable hemp seed without a hemp program license. So that, wouldn't necessarily be the mail aspect directly, but the purchase and sale, no matter the means, is regulated. In addition, there are different rules that apply for importing seeds into different states, whether it's at the agricultural and pest and disease kind of level, or a seed being certified, for example, like in Texas, pursuant to its program, it may not be legal to have seeds that are not, or sell seeds that aren't certified too. So in the mail, from like a US Postal Service standpoint, so long as what you're selling is 0.3% THC or less, they do allow the mail of hemp products, and it really, if you're going to use a private carrier, there's different policies that apply. Some won't allow you to, some will, with respect to plants or clones or genetics, but it's not illegal on its face, I suppose, to do so.
I know what you mean. There's some places, there's some gray areas right now, aren't there? But that's good to hear. So shipping is possible, mailing is possible. JP, anything on the compliance front from your work at High Grade that you'd want to add to that about mailing genetics around the country?
No, I think it's Courtney touched upon it nicely. It's just ensuring that it's legal in the areas that the seed is shipping into, and following whatever regulations that state has for those.
Great. So again, it's a bit of a state by state game.
It is, to an extent.
Okay. Question for JP. What has Matterhorn tested at? I know that that's one of High Grade CBG strains that you launched this year. Do you have any early results on Matterhorn?
Sure. I just pulled up a lab result from a sample that we sent to a lab, and we had a test over 15% CBGA. So
great. Okay.
Very good test results.
Very good test results. It's awesome to hear. I'm going to grab a couple more questions, and I'll hit the rest of these at the end, I promise. Is it illegal to take clones off of an originally purchased plant? Good question.
Not necessarily, I don't think. As long as you have the rights to use them. There are definitely instances where you're buying like a limited license to use the seeds for like one harvest, and especially if there's intellectual property considerations involved. But so long as you're lawful to, have a hemp plant as a generic hemp plant and you're allowed to cultivate it, then there wouldn't be a problem necessarily with using a clone from the mother plant. But there may be different requirements that apply with respect to, tracking and record keeping the amount of hemp you're planting, and kind of those kind of considerations.
Gotcha. So it's not there's no blanket issue with it, but you'd want to dig into your own unique scenario and contract and all of that. I gotcha. Sounds good. Last question we'll take right now. I'll hit the rest at the end. Can you legally ship CBG flower to other states?
Similar in that if it's hemp and it's test and you have your COA and your documentation to show that it is hemp, but it's not a controlled substance, so it's not federally unlawful to ship through the mail or otherwise. It would just depend on, as JP touched on, where it's being shipped to and whether there are any restrictions on possession. For example, in Idaho, there's no hemp laws, so while the transport through may be allowed under the 2018 Farm Bill, possessing hemp flower there is the equivalent of possessing marijuana. So you just want to be careful that you know where it's going, and you have the documentation to prove that it is hemp, because even if it is totally lawful, there's still a pretty decent risk of enforcement just because of how new the industry, the fact that it looks like cannabis, and it's hard to tell on the spot.
It is very true. Okay, got a couple more good questions. I'm going to do a little bit more facilitation with the panelists, and then I'll circle back and make sure we hit these at the end. Aside from legal documents, contracts, licenses, and certifications, some of the things we've been talking about, what are some common sense best practices that farmers can leverage to protect themselves? I'd like to just get into the soft side of buying hemp genetics a little bit. Rachel, you understand the production side of hemp genetics very, very well. What indicators can buyers look for to ensure that they're dealing with a trustworthy genetics company as a whole?
So I would definitely look for them participating in certification, obviously. If they're outside of certification, I would still make sure to see if that they have either a plant variety protection or a patent on their genetics, because that means that they're really proud of their genetics and they're working towards those IP protections. Also, I mean, make sure that do a Google search on them, make sure that there's nobody that's really upset with them or something's going on. I mean, we all know to take Yelp reviews with a grain of salt, but I think that that really speaks to how a company handles those bad reviews too. And then there's always your option of asking for those test results for the purities, for the germs, and making sure that what you have really reflects what's there. And you can always test the seed yourself. Once you've purchased the seed, you can always do an independent test yourself just to make sure that what they said is what you got.
Very helpful. JP, kind of in that vein, when High Grade's working with a prospective customer, what do you have available to provide in terms of validation? And what do you recommend if somebody has a supplier that's not able to share documentation or references?
Sure. I'll start with the first part. So we try to provide as much documentation supportive to the customer as needed. Depends again on the state requirements and the state programs. We've in the past have sent our CDA hemp licenses for cultivation, our CDA seed dealer's permit. If the state's required where the sale is going into, we provide the seed dealer's permits or seed labeler permits in those states. Again, we provide the COAs to show the performance and the compliance of being below 0.3% of that for that variety. And then the germ results. We provide the germ results that are going to be accompanied onto the label that they're going to receive the seed. And so they'll be able to cross-reference that. And then again, beyond that, upon request, we can also provide feminization results as well.
Great. That's helpful to know kind of what that checklist looks like. For all of the panelists, we've kind of landed on the fact that transparency is the sign of a reputable genetics company. What are some ways, though, that farmers and buyers can conduct their own due diligence on a genetics partner? Are there just some practical things that you recommend people do? I think we've touched on some of them, the sleuthing online and things like that. But is there anything that we've missed that we should touch on?
I think pretty much what you have available online, and then requests for documentation is the big ones. Licensing, record keeping, certificates of analysis, demonstration. Happy customers, all sort of those doing good business, general kind of diligence aspects.
Perfect. Rachel, even after a sale, it seems like from some of the things you've said about labeling and whatnot, that it's important to kind of continue that due diligence cycle even after you've made a purchase. What should buyers do when they have received their seed?
So when you receive the seed, it's always a good idea to keep a copy of all of your labels. And I also would recommend keeping a sample of that seed, throw it in the back of your fridge or something, just so that if anything goes wrong, you have a sample of what was sent you. And I mentioned it before, but I'll mention it again because I think it's important. You can always take a sample of that seed, take it to the lab of your choice, do a purity, a germination, a feminization test if you want, before you plant that seed. If you're really excited about new genetics, it's a new company, you're not really sure about it, do that test, because that is insurance for you that you're not going to end up roguing out half of your field or even plowing it under. I mean, those would be your options. And keeping the seed sample, if something does go wrong later on, then you have proof of this was what was sent you.
Very smart. Very smart. JP, I know that High Grade is the original breeder of some of the most widely known and trusted hemp strains in the world. Can you share tips so that buyers can ensure they're getting authentic genetics that are true to strain?
Sure. I would say just as best as possible, do the research and buy from the direct original seed breeders, and verify that the strain is licensed for production and sale by your supplier if you're getting it outside of that original breeder themselves.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Let's see, what have we not talked about yet? Let's talk about after seeds are in the ground. What can farmers do once they have their seeds or starts in their possession to help ensure their crop is going to remain compliant and deliver strong yield and profits? Do you have any kind of best practices to follow? Anyone?
I would say just good record keeping and document collection, and making sure that you're observing and taking notes, and you have a pretty robust documentation protocol of each stage and the timeline for each. So that way, even if you can't prevent something bad from happening the first time, you'll be able to not repeat the same mistakes, or identify a bad, business player if that ends up being the case too.
Right. I would encourage everyone also to kind of follow the planting and cultivation guidelines, anything that's shared by your supplier, and lean on those local resources. As you've heard us say a lot through the course of the panel, things vary a lot state to state, and hemp is grown in a huge variety of geographic regions and climate zones and just different field conditions. So I would say talk to your local ag experts too, and pull those local community kind of knowledge sources so that you're dealing with things unique to your own area. JP, maybe you can speak also to testing THC levels throughout the season to help protect yourself in terms of compliance.
I would test early and often as possible. I mean, kind of what Courtney had talked about before with hemp genetics and in some of the areas that some of these genetics have not been grown before. Some of the performance is not known. And so I think, with that understanding, there's going to be some caution from any reputable seed dealer to let you know that, you should be testing early and often to avoid any kind of compliance issues.
Yeah, very, very helpful to remind everyone. Last question, and then we'll take some Q&A, and I've got quite a few things to discuss in the queue. Looking into your crystal ball, can each of you give one key prediction you have for the hemp industry, maybe over the next 1 to 3 years? What do you think is going to happen in these next few seasons?
Well, what I hope is that the FDA and other regulatory bodies that are somewhat lagging on the back end of production and really would help facilitate the smooth process flow of the supply chain, being grown out there is some of those regulations being set. I think the USDA, the IFR is right now is still not so final. I think they're still, looking at some of that and some of those requirements that the USDA came up with. So I think we'll see some of that still evolve, hopefully with some common sense input from farmers, from seed producers, and also people on the other side of harvest. So we can kind of make, common sense regulations.
Very good. Courtney, Rachel, any crystal ball predictions for us?
I'm hoping, I guess, that you're going to see a lot more certified seed. You're going to see a lot more varieties go through the review process. And I think you'll start to see Some of the better varieties will become more widespread and more well-known, and hopefully have less uncertainty when you're buying those genetics that you're getting something that may or may not be compliant.
I agree with both of them and their points, and I think we'll see a continue in increased sophistication with respect to testing and being able to predict and kind of increase potential cannabinoid contents of various different plant compounds in cannabis, and especially with the minor cannabinoids. And it'll be interesting, I think, to see how advances in agriculture are able to kind of keep up with the sort of biosynthetic production and the synthetic production of some, like CBG and CBN, and how the industry adapts to kind of this specialized agricultural landscape we're going towards.
Right. Very helpful. Okay, we've got 7 minutes left. Let's plow through as many of these attendee questions as we possibly can. What are you guys seeing as far as the effects of COVID-19 in the hemp space? Do you have any early impact estimates on sales numbers, maybe the percentage of farmers that are actually planting this year? What do you think?
I think farmers are going to be more discerning with their source of their seeds. I think it's going to be more important for farmers to ensure the quality of the source genetics that they have to make sure that they have that. So I think we're seeing farmers ask more questions, and rightfully so. I think, to the point of sales, I haven't seen a whole lot of numbers right now, but I would think that, farmers are debating a lot. They have a lot to consider this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the uncertainty is playing a mental game with people in a lot of quarters right now, for sure. This is an interesting question. We've touched on pollination and the impact that feminized hemp seed is having. Do you predict that there will be counties that only allow feminized seed to prevent cross-pollination? I know that that's a little bit of a prediction, but I don't know if any of you have any input on what the climate is out there for trying to prevent pollination issues.
So with seed production, they control pollen flow, and Rachel's kind of talked upon that for the purpose of mitigating any type of contamination through seed production. Beyond that, I don't know how much they'd be able to regulate that. The need for it is obvious, right? Where, I've heard many a times that there's no such thing as seedless hemp in you name the state, because of some of the issues from having non-feminized seed, not even from your own field, but from your neighbor or your neighbor's neighbor on the other side. And, there's a reason why Rachel and the certifying bodies have their isolation requirements for pollen flow for those reasons.
Absolutely. Anybody else have any ideas on that one, or did JP check the box? Great. Why do most hemp seed companies have minimum quantities on seeds, and isn't that slowing the growth of the industry? Anybody want to weigh in on MOQs?
I won't, I guess, be able to answer, specifically why the quantities were set. I do know that with the year that we're having, that HG has reconsidered the minimum order requirements to kind of help with that. And so what I'd say is give one of our sales reps a call and see what we can do.
Good thought too, that even if you're seeing an MOQ that's onerous for you, might be worth picking up the phone and calling that supplier and seeing if they're willing to work with you. And it's good to hear that HG is already responding to that and bringing those MOQs down to help farmers. Appreciate that. What's the earliest you can or should test a plant? That might be a Rachel question. Rachel, how big do they have to be to test them?
I think JP could answer better because we just have the tests reported to us.
Yeah, that's true. Any ideas, JP, on kind of what's the earliest you should launch testing after planting?
I think, once you're going into flower, we do early leaf ratio for our development of our lines to be able to get some kind of indication of what those end ratios will be. For farmers beyond, the COAs, I would say, any type of guidance from the genetics companies on when to test. It could vary on the variety. I've heard people start testing as early as 3 to 4 weeks in the flower. Again, I would make sure to check with your genetics company and your salesman that you're working with.
Great. Let's see, here's an interesting one. Can you rename hemp strains and use the same lab results? Do any of you have the background to respond to that question, or to maybe even give any guidance on where to look?
So variety names, there's a whole process with variety names, and the truth in labeling that Courtney kind of touched on earlier has to do with that. And so I would kind of, refer people to the USDA variety naming information that they have. But I don't think that would be, that's certainly something that we would not do, to rename a strain just to kind of match lab results, if that's what the question is.
Right. Okay. Very good. Let's see. Scan through and see if we've gotten to most everything. Oh, this is an interesting question. Do you think that the post-harvest material grown from certified seed will have greater market value?
I don't know about the market value, and Rachel can kind of jump in on this on the backside, but with certified seed, it brings certain assurances and crop insurance. There's certain implications towards crop insurance and using certified seed as a source. With Florida, we've seen that in some states, Florida is the one that they require farmers to grow certified seed or approved seed. So the value of that seed is the ability to actually participate in the program. Gotcha.
And I guess that this is going to be one of the first seasons that we see what happens with certified biomass at the end of the day. So that's going to be an interesting thing to sort out. Before we close, do any of you have any closing thoughts, or has the Q&A in our conversation sparked any things that you think are critical that we left out of the panel?
Sorry, I just want to add one last point to that last bit of the certification. With smokable flower, I think, there's that niche market of smokable flower and having certified biomass that it came from that genetics. I think a lot of people that may be on this call possibly have some experience in the marijuana side, and a lot of times you're told what type of flower you're buying, and it's kind of on the word of the guy you're getting it from. And so certification would lend that to the biomass on the backside for that smokable flower. I could see that.
That's a good point. That's a little bit different market, a few different considerations at play there. Well, thank you all. I guess in closing, a lot of this conversation has centered on things that we learned from our parents, hasn't it? Stranger danger, you need to know who you're dealing with, doing your homework, even if you're an industry newbie, dig in, do some research, learning and following the rules. And I know in the hemp industry, there are a lot of them, and they vary widely from state to state, but they're there to protect you. And of course, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is, right? I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today. It's been a great conversation. We really hope that this webinar will help all of you have a very successful season farming hemp. We're sharing a lot of great content on our website, and we're just getting rolling with our HempTruth initiative. I would encourage all of you to go to hemp-truth.com. There's actually a buyer checklist there that will kind of walk you through some of the steps that we've talked about together today and give you a reminder and a tool to use as you're going through the genetics purchasing process. There's going to be a recording of this webinar also that will be there. That's hemp-truth.com. We'd love to hear from you online as well at #HempTruth. I hope you all have a great evening and stay healthy out there. Thanks so much.